Hey, Midgardians, I'm Clay.
And I'm Joe.
Welcome to That Midgard Show. This is a podcast where we talk about the Midgard campaign setting published by our friends at Kobold Press.
Yep. And in this episode, we're going to continue our series on the locations and lore found in the holy robes of Sister Adelind. That's the chapter of the Empire of Ghouls that we started last week. So if you missed episodes 13 and 14, check them out on your favorite podcast streaming platform or on YouTube. So because there's a lot to unpack in this chapter, our discussion is going to take place over a few episodes in our Empire of the Ghouls series. So we're going to do our best to avoid spoilers, just mainly by focusing on lore, which is what this podcast is all about. So we'll focus on the lore, the locations, the NPCs, all that good stuff. And if we feel like we're going to tread into spoiler land, we'll let you know. So in our last episode, we were in the Ironcrag Catons, where we discussed the Black Caton of Gristle and the Black Fortress, which are two major stops in this chapter of Empire of Ghouls. So the party's primary task is to recover the holy robes of Sister Adelind, which is an artifact believed to provide an advantage against undead to those who wear them. In this episode, though, we're going to head north to the town of Karasin, which is in the western region of the Grand Dutchy of Dornig, and 100 miles or so north of the Black Fortress. The reason as to why the party heads in this direction is part of the adventure itself. So suffice it to say, your party will need at some point in your story to head in this direction. Travel through this area is not easy, and it's going to take your party at least 8 days, according to the book. But if you remember last time, we talked about the high altitude and using some high altitude mechanics. So if you do that, travel here might be closer to like 16 days. So this is your opportunity as the GM to add some side adventures and some random encounters, things like that. And there's some stuff on pages like 84 to 92 that can help to just enliven the character's travel a bit on the way to Karasin. So it is at this point, your party should have drawn some unwanted attention unbeknownst to them. Again, our recommendation is that you don't hand wave or montage travel in this campaign wherever practical, right? There's a lot of cool stuff to do, and travel in this region is supposed to be dangerous. So lean into that, right? Keep in mind that your party's route will take them close to the Dornig Krakovar border. So one of your side adventures could be something related to the Blood Sisters or spies from the Blood Kingdom or Ghoul Emporium. In fact, there's a really good plat hook available in the adventure that can be an ongoing subplot for the campaign. But once your party reaches the border town of Karasin, this is an opportunity to kind of carry over that refugee subplot from the Black Fortress that we talked about. This is because the population of Karasin has increased nearly like sixfold due to the influx of the refugees from Krakovar settling in that area after the country was conquered and is now basically a province of the Vampire Kingdom. So around the town, basically this huge camp of displaced Krakovian citizens is just surrounding Karasin. And this creates a little bit of tension because there's more refugees than there are locals, and it's kind of become this stress on the resources in the area. But the locals are kind of doing everything they can to help and settle the refugees because they know they're going to be there for a while. So Dorninshan soldiers patrol this kind of small city and its large refugee encampment, and they're looking for signs of undead who kind of will intermittently raid Karasin and those that are kind of seeking refuge there. Again, this is an opportunity for your party to kind of help the soldiers and the refugees fend off any of these undead incursions. So this can be some good, random encounters, right? There's all this kind of tension going on, these raids in the area. So flesh out any of the spies who are looking for surviving members of the Krakovian family.
Yeah, now we're not going to go too deep in the Grand Duchy of Dornig, but I do want to give you kind of a brief overview to kind of provide the GMs and everybody listening, some sort of a background. So we'll talk about a little bit of Dornig. We'll talk about the conquering of Krakovar as well. But the Grand Duchy of Dornig is also known as the domain of princes. It stood for many, many human generations as the true successor state to the power that once was Arbanès and Thorn. This was evident in their Shadow Roads, and it was also evident in their hoarding of lost knowledge and magic of the elves and other arcana. Most of all, it was evident in their ruler, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. But the one thing to know about Dornig is it is ruled by elves. These are the folks that stayed behind after the Great Retreat. And because of her rule, Dornig presented the impression of a land of peace and prosperity. But in reality, like most countries, it has always been a cauldron of continual political intrigue as the three most powerful branches of Cathania's descendants and a host of minor cadet branches plot and conspire against each other. Now, the Imperatrix is an ancient elf. Her face is elongated and narrow. Her pointed ears almost touched behind her head. Her eyes are huge and black with dilated pupils. And before her debilitating illness, she spoke in a whisper that could carry the length of a ballroom, and she moved with a quiet grace. You could say that she just kind of floated over the floors. Her hair remains long and white and intricately braided each morning, and she wears this simple circlet of copper as her crown, a gift of her consort realm.
Yeah. So you kind of briefly mentioned here that this debilitating illness. So basically, things kind of suddenly changed 4 years ago when the Imperatrix complained to a handmaiden of feeling rather exhausted during an event. So she retires to her chamber for the evening, and then she did not wake up in the morning. Her personal servants summoned surgeons, doctors, a priest, and even members of the arcane college. But nothing would work. No poultice, no potion, no spell. Nothing could revive her from this sleep. So now she's basically still breathing, but she lies in this coma-like trance. And the passage of time kind of slows slightly around her. So it's kind of got this Snow White thing going, right? None had encountered this phenomena before, and there's no text mentions of anything like any kind of affliction like this. So it's a big mystery. But Her Majesty's body was moved into her chambers in Castle Graberg, where she is guarded by this dedicated staff of just utterly loyal servants. For the moment, the approach is basically to just wait for her to recover on her own, rather than kind of risking harm or any experimental spell or magical device. So they're going for the wait and see approach. We'll see how that works out.
Yeah.
The nation, for its part, is kind of seething with this indecision because the Imperatrix has not chosen an heir, and the nation's currently ruled by representatives of three great houses, plus Saint Mistress, Rowan Mantle, Abbess of the Twin Cathedral. She's this kind of powerfully built, muscular, blonde, elf-marked lady, and she looks like she's probably more suited to like driving an oxen team rather than running a major religion. But she's been, for many years, the Imperatrix's constant companion, trusted advisor, and was a major avenue for outsiders to gain Her Majesty's attention in personal matters. So the presence of true elves in the court kind of confuses matters even further. There's the Black Knight and her alleged granddaughter, Clavoa Moonsong, claimed direct descent from the Imperatrix, though she has a few friends in Dornig. Nothing in the lore really says why the Imperatrix fell into a coma. So this is where you can kind of come up with your own rumors and just kind of work it up. Maybe you can come up with a cool story plot for this. But the Grand Dutchy has also been this a refuge for people fleeing other parts of the world. So you have humans escaping the wastes and the undead ruled lands of Morgau and Dorish, as well as petty nobles out of favor in their native lands that have flocked into the Imperatrix's court. And with the fall of Krakovar to undead forces, the tide of refugees has now increased. So when the Imperatrix was awake and aware, she ruled fairly and justly and kept the various factions under control and foreign complications outside of her borders and all that stuff. So the nation is beginning to kind of fragment as like these long dormant fissures within her kingdom, and threats without kind of endanger the kingdom without a clear line of succession. So this whole line of succession thing is super important there's a lot of, I guess you call it like political intrigue that you can kind of play into with a lot of this. So, definitely kind of play that up in your games as well. But when Krakovar fell to the ghouls and the vampires, the Imperatrix's court kind of welcomed the queen of their land, and many of its people kind of swarmed into the eastern principalities. And through all this, Dornig has remained this bastion of stability in a very troubled world.
I love this political intrigue.
Yeah, definitely.
Again, this is something that Kobold Press does very well as some background tension in your games. Knowing that we have a deal with the political structure in Dornig itself, the fall of a country through invasion, and the migration of a lot of the Krakovan citizens into different areas. Dornig is one of them, and then further east is another area as well. This is where you can kind of interweave a lot of this political tension into your games when your PCs are interacting with the local NPCs.
Yeah, and Kobold Press. Another thing that Kobold Press does well here is they don't tell us why there's a coma, right? They don't give us all those details, and that's on purpose. You see that question a lot in like our Discord group where people are like, why is this? How come they didn't tell us this? And they did that on purpose because they want to let you make it your own Midgard. So you come up with a reason, what works best for your story and your players. So I kind of like that they leave that very open-ended for us to fill in those gaps,
Yeah, the other reason is they want to make it easier, if you don't play in Midgard, make it easier for you to take elements out of Midgard and place it into your own world. You can put it in Faerun, you can do it, wherever. So Kobold Press gets a lot of criticism for not fleshing out every little detail. But, they shouldn't, because they want, as Joe said, they want to give you the opportunity to add some of your own creativity to this. So I really love this cross-border political intrigue that just doesn't affect a small area or a particular city. It has wide-reaching negative effects to many countries. So in fact, because of the fall of Krakovar, the royal family and her court has relocated into Dornig. Where? Well, there's a specific location, listed in Empire of the Ghouls. But as far as the lore goes, her court and her are, all over Dornig, trying to raise an army to help evict the vampires. So that court is led by Queen Ursula. And right now she's operating secretly in Kerrison, because the Vampire Kingdom's hold on Krakovar is tenuous at best. Reaver Drawers from Wolfheim has seized the peninsula to the northwest of Krakovar and the city of Jost. And so the royal court rules in exile in Dornig is a thorn in the Vampire Kingdom's side. And the vampires are still consolidating their power in Krakovar. So it's one thing to conquer a country, it's quite another thing to govern it. A year or so ago, then Prince Lucian of Morgau decided the time was right to strike against the electoral kingdom of Krakovar and to seize its lands for the glory of Morgau and the Red Sisters. And now that he's secured a military alliance with the Ghoul Imperium, he was able to make that move. So they started by quietly infiltrating the Krakovan spy network, which is called MICE. They did that several months before the armies invaded. They fed them false intelligence to throw them off guard. And then, just as the Ghost Knights of Morgau, joined by Blood Priestess Sonia, who is a warrior priest of Marina and Mavros, they made their first attack on Jarlsberg Castle on the border under the cover of darkness. And with the help of a Derrickil Legion, who emerged from underground in tunnels beneath Tannenberg Castle to the west. Those two areas were very important military strongholds in the area, and neither fortress, because of that split of forces, could support one another or even defend themselves effectively. And because it's undead fighting the living, you have to imagine that the slaughter that followed was horrific. The ghouls poured out from below earth like ants in vast numbers. They catch the Krakovans completely off guard and started massacring them. As the Darakal fed on the dead, the Krakovan survivors fled north in terror. Jarlsberg also fell that same night, and its defenders, though brave, were ill-equipped to deal with the Ghost Rider Templars, who are on flying horses that could phase through castle walls.
For a second here, right? That whole picture you just painted of undead pouring out of the ground, these Ghost Rider Templar flying horses, that whole thing, like, I want to see them make like a video trailer for that because it would be absolutely horrifying. Can you imagine being in that castle when that happened? Like that could be a video game. That would make a great video game, I feel like.
Yeah, for sure. Or at least a book.
I want Midgard novels in the worst way.
Yeah, me too.
Bad.
Me too. But the visuals, like you said, of that, I mean, it's just this blitzkrieg that just quickly overwhelmed the military and political forces of that country. Every reason for it to fall quickly. You know, it was a brilliant plan. After those two fortresses fell, they headed north to Warsaw, and the Darakal army marched northeast to Wallenberg. Neither city held out too long, from the onslaught. Then, just as King Enric was preparing to lead the order of Storm Knights from Heidelberg Castle south to meet the invaders, he was assassinated in his throne room by a vampiric spy. And although the undead killer was swiftly slain, the king's death was a bitter blow to Krakovan morale. It was then that Grand Marshal Jolenta Ludmiska led an army to confront the combined undead forces, but the Krakovan soldiers based on the coast, the northern coast, were not used to facing undead enemies, let alone fight at night. And if you recall, our own history, most battle took place during the day. It was just not possible for medieval soldiers to do that during the day. But when you're dealing with undead that have dark vision, that was a major advantage for them.
Yeah.
So the armies of Morgau won a convincing victory on the battlefield, and Krakova itself, the city of Krakova, which is also known as the City of Mermaid, surrendered a few days later to the Ghost Knights commander, Princess Harista. And Queen Ursula and the other surviving members of the royal family then fled into exile. So with that success, the newly titled King Lucian wasted no time in declaring Krakovar the third province of the Greater Duchy of Morgau and appointed Princess Harista as its governor. As a bonus, she also granted the greater title of Duchess. But as the priestesses of the Red Goddess moved to establish new centers of worship, not everything has gone as Lucian wished. Sensing an opportunity, Reaver dwarves from Wolfheim sailed across the Nider Straits and established a beachhead at Skagarholm on the northern peninsula of Krakowa, and threatening the city of Jost, and then they seized it for themselves. So far the dwarves have successfully defended the city against all comers and are looking to expand their territory. This is their beachhead on the southern mainland. So they have no qualms about recruiting human Krakovans who wish to flee their new rulers. And the dwarves of the Iron Crag used this opportunity to take Greisel before Lucian could capture all of that as well. So Joe and I have talked about all of the different flavors of dwarves, and we haven't gotten to all of them, So we have the Zobek dwarves, we have the Canton dwarves, and we have the Reaver dwarves from the Northlands. And I believe that they are likely inspired by Norse Vikings in our history, because the term Reaver essentially means border raider. So in the Northlands, dwarven rule requires those who submit to them to supply tribute in the form of gold and slaves. And human tributes worked hard labor in the mines or in their lowland farms. And these client races first gave their masters the nickname Reaver Dwarf. And the dwarves decided they liked that, and they did not discourage their use at all. So the vampire lord's undead power and devotion to the Red Goddess made them extremely dangerous, but they fight among themselves more often than with their neighbors. And as they have grown more numerous, it becomes harder for them to feed their ghoulish allies. So meanwhile, Queen Ursula seeks to foster resistance to the undead occupation among her former subjects from her exile in Dornig. The newly taken Krakovar remains a precarious conquest for Lucian, but a very rich one. But he is surrounded by a lot of enemies. Baba Yaga is one of them. The Amazons of Perunalia and the kings of neighboring kingdoms maintain a working alliance against the undead. And so for the time being, the Krakovan nobles live in fear of their new masters as resistance grows amongst the peasantry. And the eastern coast and border still are at risk from attacks by Northlanders, trolls, and Kazaki raiders from the east. So it's going to be very hard for the vampires to hold on to their territory if the Reaver Dwarves ally with the exiled royal family and launch a counterattack. And if Queen Ursula can win the support of Grandmother Baba Yaga, Morgau's situation will be far, far worse. But for now,
there's a lot going on.
I know.
There's a lot. There's a lot. That's literally just surrounded by enemies everywhere. And again, it kind of comes back not just to the political intrigue, but the citizenry kind of when the people are scared, they take it out on their leaders. It's a tense situation all around.
Yeah. And this is really an opportunity. If you're going to do a lot of adventuring in the Vampire Kingdom, this is a place of unrest and instability. The rest of Morgau is fairly stable, but this is an area where it could turn bad for King Lucian at any time.
Yeah. If you've seen like the Castlevania show on Netflix, not quite that bad, right? There's not like an army of monsters marching through, but the way that people in the towns in that area during all that kind of were just living in constant fear, knowing that there's this imminent threat. That's kind of the feeling, the vibe I would kind of put out when in this area, when you're in towns in this area, human towns and stuff like that. That's kind of the constant fear and apprehension that's going on there all the time.
Yeah, exactly. It's ripe for exploration. It's ripe for role playing. To me, the best part of RPGs in general is that social element of the game, where you can take a story in a different direction just by having the right kind of conversations with NPCs. Because GMs have a lot of information about these NPCs, and in this campaign, there's a lot of backstory for each of these NPCs. So it's really easy if the NPCs say the right thing to get a lot of information from the NPCs. Also, it's really easy for the PCs to offend some NPCs, based on like arrogance or
right.
asking the wrong questions or something like that. So I, as a GM, always have try to have as much backstory, what could go right in the conversation, what could go wrong in the conversation. And it's not a lot of additional prep, it's just like quickly consulting one of the books, sketching out a few notes and kind of seeing how the conversation goes. Riffing, improving, as a GM, that's my favorite part. Sometimes I'm ready for it. Other times I'm not, so it just kind of it depends. So for now, Princess Harista, who is Grand Marshal of the Ghost Knights, rules the newly formed province of Krakovar as its protector from its capital, Krakova. Now they find themselves in day-to-day control of the province, with the population more than 7 times that of the principality itself. So to consolidate her power, the Slata, which is the ruling land-holding nobles, there are thousands of them. They're the ones that used to elect the king or queen and make the laws of the land. They have been forced to kowtow to Princess Harista's line, following a series of bloody executions of those who proved headstrong. Many of the remaining nobles still administer much of the government of the province, but their power has been hobbled. For instance, Princess Harista abolished the annual gathering of envoys, where new laws were promulgated, and the most senior members of the Slada were killed for treason against the crown. Throughout Krakovar, Wotan's temples were razed, and the priestesses of the Red Goddess established new shrines to Marina in the cities and towns, while Perun's places of worship were rededicated as temples to his Mask of Mavros. New commanderies of the Ghost Knights have been established at Heidelberg and Tannenberg, and they rebuilt those strongholds following its destructions during the conquest. So, gosh.
Complete upheaval.
Yeah, complete upheaval.
Complete upheaval.
Yeah. And I know that Joe and I just threw out just a ton of lore. Everything that we talked about can be found in the Midgard World Book and in the Empire of the Ghouls book itself. So
yeah,
lots of opportunity. These are, to really properly run, any Kobold Press campaign, you have to do a little bit of prep before you just dive into it. And reading about these areas, using the information that we provided you, can really help with your storytelling. I promise you. Just a little bit of extra time before getting into it.
Yeah, so I mean, some good note taking, some good setup. Listen out some NPCs, listen out some locations, listen out some motivations and some ideas. I'm a big fan of I don't call it a flow chart, but like a mind map. I mind map my campaigns a bit and see where all those connections are and like where it can lead. It's kind of a fun way to a fun visual way to kind of put everything together. And when your party does something, you can kind of go to that spot in the mind map and see all the different ways it can branch out. So
yeah, much easier than creating a 50-page document. Mind map is just like one page.
Yeah. And then, the cool thing is you can like link that mind map to, let's say, like Microsoft OneNote or something like that. I also do a lot of my prep. I actually run my games out of Foundry a lot, and I can link everything. So a lot of good good campaign management tool definitely is helpful with campaigns like this. But let's talk a bit about this exile court, the Court-in-Exile in Karasin, right? Because at some point, if the party, if they play their cards right, may have an opportunity for an audience with the Krakovian Royal Court-in-Exile, which was led by Queen Urzela, who is actually in Karasin secretly. Before I dive into this too much, here it is. Here is your spoiler alert. Spoiler alert, spoiler alert. So if you're playing Empire of the Ghouls, if you're a player, not a GM, or if you plan on being a player sometime soon, you may kind of want to pause and jump to the next section here. We'll list times out and timestamps in the description notes so you kind of jump. We're going to get a little bit into spoiler realm here. So the court is planning a covert expedition to the free city of Jost, which is up in the Wolfmark. This is at the northern part of the former electoral kingdom of Krakovar, which is now under the control of the Reaver Dwarves. A courtier is being sent to meet with the dwarven leaders and solicit their support in the war to come against the vampire ruling Krakovar. So the encounter with the Court-in-Exile is where the GMs can really play out the conversation between the characters and the court. There's the optional status rule for Midgard. And basically, depending on what you do, your status will change. And the character with the highest status is generally seen as the de facto party leader by members of the court. And they address the majority of their questions directly to that character. So revisit that status rule. I really like status in Midgard. I think it's a really cool touch and can be a lot of fun to play with. The Court-in-Exile is actually composed of some important NPCs as well, starting with Queen Urzela of the Krakovar. She's this calm, composed, elegant middle-aged woman who's dressed in robes of like cream and gold. She has this gold crown that's hung with these strings of pearls that kind of frame her face. She looks every inch a monarch. And I recommend that you kind of play her as this fierce and commanding individual. I'd kind of go playing her as like this smart, shrewd, calculating kind of person who just won't suffer fools, right? She doesn't have time for that stuff. She doesn't have time for pretenders or posers. So that's kind of a recommended way of playing her. I think that's how you played her too, Clay.
Yeah.
Was that kind of shrewd individual, right?
Yeah, I like to play all NPCs, particularly female PCs, as very smart and very strong. No wallflowers in my games.
Yeah, well, especially a queen, right? Especially
Yeah,
this royal person. She has to be, being a monarch in exile. That's not an easy burden to bear. So I
yeah,
think that probably shapes some of her attitude as well.
sure. And the reason I do that is throughout our own history, there's been a lot of monarchs, kings and queens who've just been these fragile, dumb individuals, and I think that was a bummer. Because of that a lot of bad decisions were made. Because she's a queen exile, I want to make sure that she comes off as a very strong individual, very focused, very determined to win her country back, and not just live in splendor and wealth for the rest of her days.
Yeah, yeah. I kind of like the idea of her being this very commanding presence that makes the people that follow her want to follow her. That want like she's a leader. She might not be a warrior, but warriors follow her and respect her, and so that's kind of how I see her as this very commanding, strong leader.
Yeah.
Having fled to Dornig to seek the support of the Imperatrix, she was disappointed at being repeatedly kind of rebuffed for several years by the Imperatrix, who was hesitant to send troops to her aid. And when the Imperatrix slipped into a comatose state, Azula saw the prospect of kind of securing military aid from Dornig, from Dornig. Azilla hasn't really given up hopes on returning to her kingdom, hopefully at the head of an army and liberating it from vampire rule. She's responsible for declaring Sister Adelind a martyr. Azurla regards her as an inspirational symbol of the battle for freedom and is interested in any information regarding the warrior. So, we're looking for those robes, and Zola may be kind of a key person to speak to about this. So also present is the queen's adult daughter, Zacia Walaska, priestess of Wotan. She wears her long black hair in a warrior's ponytail, and a silver holy symbol of the world tree hangs around her neck. She's wise, she's insightful, and will, through any half truths or gaps in the party story, she'll kind of see right through that, right? Zosia hates the undead with a passion and is well disposed to those who share her favor to rid this vermin from her land. So if you're like coming in there like, yeah, we want to kill all the undead and get them out of there, she's all for it. So it's a good way to get on her good side. So next is Archduke Avgast Waleska, brother of the late Krakowian king Inrik. Before the fall of Krakova, the Archduke had this reputation for being both devious and ruthless among the Slatha, which are the nobles responsible for electing the king. However, coming close to death at Wallenberg kind of changed Avgast for the better. Convinced that Prune was behind his lucky escape, he swore an oath to the war god and he would rid his homeland of these vampires. So he's determined to win the support of the Reaver Dwarves, who he believes are the army that Kragova needs to defeat the undead. So that's his whole thing. He's like, let's get up there. Let's kind of win over the Reaver Dwarves. They're great warriors and they can actually help us. The problem is that the Archduke is just as arrogant as he was before Krakova fell and doesn't believe that a few ghoul patrols in the area pose any real threat to him. So play that as you will. I mean, there's nothing worse than an arrogant leader. And this guy, I feel like he's prone to make a mistake. The last person to kind of bring up in this is Lord Alonso Cavanto. He's this gray-haired former adventurer. He's a warrior of great renown who became the ruler of Karasin several years ago. He's not part of the Krakowian court, but he is the host to the royal family. So he's the one basically keeping the royal family safe at this point. He's there. He's putting them up. So Karasin's status and wealth grew under his stewardship and has lined up an advantageous marriage of his grown daughter when Krakova was invaded by Morgal, and refugees flooded into Karasin, throwing his well-ordered life basically into disarray. So he is a loyal vassal of the powerful Hirish Demang family, And Alonso's main concern is what will happen to Kerrison if the vampires learn that the Court-in-Exile is actually hiding in the city. The fact that the ghouls are actively seeking the Krakovian noble in this area, who's not part of the royal family, really alarms him. So he is quite nervous, and the party offers Alonso an opportunity to kind of solve a problem. Assuming the PCs don't screw up their meeting with these important PCs, right? So a lot can happen here for the party depending on how they handle all this. At any rate, the Kerrison is another opportunity for your players to kind of spend a few days to rest. Remember that altitude sickness mechanic that we talked about if you're going to use that. But you can use this time to kind of showcase the devastation wrought by the undead of the Blood Kingdom, right? So this is where your players can really see the fallout of everything that's happened. Because of the war, families have been torn apart by the onslaught of the undead. They work to rebuild themselves in these makeshift villages outside the city. Kerrison's orphanages are full of Krakovian children who were rescued from ruined villages or found half starved by Dornatian patrols on the roads out of Krakovar. Queen Ursula often visits the populace outside the city when she is in Kerrison to bring food and hope to her people. She's careful to remain disguised during these trips, aware of the basically ever-present danger of the undead. Though kind of saddened at their losses, these hardy Krakovians kind of stand tall and proud, certain their queen's going to find a way to raise an army to take back their homeland. Again, this says a lot about the queen, right? The fact that these people are just beaten, they're scattered, they're living in makeshift villages, yet they're proud of their heritage, they're proud of their queen, they're certain of her. So that, I think, speaks a lot to her as a leader, right? So at this point where the party has decided how they're going to get to the Free City and the Wolfmark, there are two equally dangerous routes. Overland skirting the edge of the Tomierran Forest, but staying west of the border of the Blood Kingdom, or taking up the opportunity to get there quick using a Fey Road. So we're going to get into that in a minute because Fey Roads are cool. GMs remember spending more than a few days with that arrogant Archduke who will accompany the party is likely to try the character's patience. He's arrogant. He's kind of a jerk. Play him that way. Try to piss off the party a bit with him. Play up to add a kind of a dimension of tension to the party, just to the point one of the PCs may want to kill him. So, really lay into that. There's nothing better than an NPC that your party absolutely hates. The Archduke kind of treats them like his personal servants, right? Assigning them all manner of menial tasks, taking offense if any member of the party fails to show enthusiasm or difference. I can tell them, you go get the firewood, you make me food, stuff like that, right?
Peel me a grape.
Peel me a grape. And they should be excited to do it, damn it. Right? Yes. So they can make a good impression on him as well to gain a better treatment by him. So by asking him about Krakovar, that will, he'll want to talk about that kind of thing. He clearly does love his homeland. He really hates the undead. So if the party leans into that stuff, they can still get on his good side. He's also an excellent storyteller. So he'll vividly kind of recount stories of the Electoral Kingdom and its fall, all that stuff. And if you want information on that, if you want to be him telling that story, check out in the world book. It's on page 91. That story is there. And so you can kind of recount that story for your players. So, and he'll do that with this fiery passion, right? He's very passionate about all of that. So again, arrogant, but there's this other side to him as well. He's a very dual character that you can play up to both sides of it, and your party's going to love to hate him, but he's got a lot of good information.
And it's that storytelling around the fire is why we hit you with all of this lore. You guys are probably out there going, oh my God, Clan Joe, stop with the lore. I can't take it all in. But because Kobold Press campaigns are sandboxes, you don't know exactly which direction your party will go. And I know a lot of GMs don't like the railroad their parties in a certain direction. So it's all of this information is being provided to you just in case your PCs decide we don't want to go to Jost, we want to go straight to Jarlsberg, and that way you have all of this information that you can pass on to PCs and in a piecemeal way or as a big lore dump, but also to fuel some side stories, just in case your PCs turn right instead of go left like you originally planned.
It's a good opportunity to kind of get your players familiar with Midgard, maybe even falling in love with Midgard a bit, right? It's a really robust world. It's the reason that I kind of was drawn to Midgard was because of all the cool lore and all of that, but without it being overly built, like we talked about earlier, that I can still make it my own. And scenes like this, sitting around the campfire, get the crackling fire, get some cool music going, and start telling, recounting a story that this NPC is telling to your players. And it really, I feel like, draws them in and makes the world feel super alive. So it's a great opportunity for that, right?
Yeah. I mean, in 5e WotC material, you don't get this level of lore. A lot of the lore you have to go to the older books to get, to some of the wikis out there. Kobold Press provides all of this information to you for a reason. They want to give you a good backstory so you can develop your own stories, whichever setting that you play in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like Midgard is like opportunity like this kind of gives it that Middle Earth type feel, right? Where you can recount the stories of old.
Yeah. And the whole story about the invasion, this is like this classic Lord of the Rings where people are recounting something that happened in the past.
Yeah. I was there.
I was
1,000 years ago.
Yes, exactly.
We talked about these two different routes they can take. And I think we should start with my favorite. I'm going to let you take the reins in this one. Let's talk about the Fey Roads, and then we can go over to the Tomierran Forest. So tell us about some Fey Roads, man, because they're like the coolest thing in Midgard. They're one of the most unique features of Midgard.
Yeah, absolutely. Super cool. Fey Roads are very unique. They are the superhighway of the world, and it enables your party to get to the next locations fast. And each Fey Road is different, but they all share one thing. They're deadly and they're dangerous. So all Fey Roads have a different ecosystem, from being brightly lit, pretty, and peaceful to being gloomy, creepy, and dark with buzzing fireflies as the only source of natural light. The network of Shadow Roads grows, withers, and changes over the years. However, the experience of traveling on them is usually similar, no matter who their maker might be. These roads are built by powerful magic, and they are protected by Fey, Bearfolk, and other road wardens that offer swifter, more reliable travel than venturing over open land. In the Shadow Realm, open grasslands, forests, and any other natural terrain is subject to change and warpage. So the use of roads provides one of the few certain ways of getting from point A to B. They're still perilous, and travel comes with a number of possible dangers. The reason I mention this is because there's a third way. You can actually go to the Shadow Realm itself and travel to other locations through that. Things ebb and flow in the Shadow Realm itself. It will change, roads will move, forests will relocate, cities will relocate. But the one thing that the Fey Roads offer is a consistent way of getting from point A to B. So due to the nature of the Empire of the Ghouls story, I recommend that you stick with the description of the Fey Road that Empire of the Ghouls provides. This is a huge opportunity for GMs to add their own twist to what the Fey Road looks like. This is where you can really bring out your library of Grimm's fairy tales to the party. Another great resource for kind of a grim landscape is Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, or even the older Ravenloft material that's available on the DM's Guild. They all offer some ideas to creep up the Fey Road. But the book both Joe and I love and recommend the most is the Book of Ebb and Tides, which offers a ton of material on the Shadow Realms and the Fey Roads themselves. In your games, if you use Shadow Roads as a way for your party to get quickly from one place to another, it's also a natural opportunity to attempt some highway robbery along the way. Some of the robbers could be a group of enormous bearfolk, a horrifying company of Darkul soldiers, or a heavily armed Shadow Fey stepping out of the shadows around a single traveler or even a group. Traveling the hundreds of miles along the Shadow Road is fairly swift, but not instantaneous. And the better kept and better warded roads of the Shadow Fey are even swifter than roads elsewhere. For instance, it takes 1d3 days to pass from any major city with Fey or Gnomish influence in the mortal world to the major Elven or Fey courts in the Shadow Realm. Travel from regions without elves, Fey, or gnomes often take a bit longer, on the order of 1d6 days. And the known and functional roads are fewer and less well kept. So even shadow roads require maintenance. And travel along these shadow roads in a region with little or no magic, such as the wastelands, can take 1d12 days. For enormous distances, such as across seas and oceans or across continents, travel can be up to 2d12 days along a shadow road, still much shorter than the months or years such trips normally take. So in the Book of Ebb and Tides, there are 2 tables that GMs can draw upon to augment your party's shadow road experience. One is on page 78, called 6 Famous Road Wardens, and the other is on its next page, called Shadow Road Lore. Those from outside the Shadow Realm who travel along the Shadow Roads find the plains roads can be overgrown chaos of hedge mages, twisting passages, hollows, dells, deserts, what have you. And as we previously mentioned, each road may vary, but all are notorious for lacking wide vistas or straight paths. Travelers may leave the path and wander off of the road, but it will take them time to find their way back because then they start entering the warped world of the Shadow Fey. Many have never returned if they step off the path. And also doing so sacrifices any protection offered by the Fey that built the road or by warding stones and waymarks placed on the roads themselves. There are creepy shadow creatures, fiends, and celestials who all use these roads for purposes of their own, and they dislike competition. In game terms, the shadow roads are filled with dangerous encounters. They're not very wide roads. Coming upon somebody, going the other direction could ruin your party's day. More powerful adventurers will attract more powerful creatures, so this is like scale up things. Fey and undead are common, as well as beasts of the night, marauding giants, and other shadow creatures. Additionally, the Shadow Fey guard some of the roads using blackstone keeps, from which they send their minions forth to prey on the unwary, or at least to collect tolls in the form of memory filters, scrolls, silver. Lots of information in Chapter 10 of Book of Ebb and Tides to sprinkle in your Shadow Road encounters with your PCs. Like Joe said, it's the coolest part of the campaign. It's also the coolest part of Courts of the Shadow Fey, who have to use a Shadow Road to get to the court. Yeah. I highly recommend it. If you can use it, use it.
So Clay, we're talking mostly about Empire Ghouls, but some of our listeners may not be doing Empire Ghouls, but they're absorbing some of the lore for the areas for their own campaigns. But I think everybody at some point is probably going to want to take their players down a Shadow Road. If you were to enter a Shadow Road, right, there's these gates around the world, and they're marked on the Midgard map. There's a gate, and you have to generally have some kind of key or some spell in order to open. There are spells in the Midgard Heroes Handbook that are specific for opening Shadow Roads, things like that. You enter the Shadow Road. What does it look like when you enter? Because we talk about it being a road. We talk about it not exactly being in the Shadow Realm, but if you wander off the road, you can end up in the Shadow Realm. If I was your player and you were describing what I'm seeing on the Shadow Road, what would you describe to me? Tell us what it looks like. Is it a cobble road and you're stuck in almost a tunnel, but somehow you can push your way out? What's it like?
Yeah. Well, I start with some imagery, so, in the VTT or at the table, I will show them a picture. All of the Shadow Roads that I've seen described are very narrow, creepy, Grimm's fairy tale like trees. But the first thing that I touch upon is like sensation, So when you enter the road, you feel time dilate. You actually feel it in your body. The temperature changes in some way. The sounds immediately go from something more pleasant to something that is more uncertain. The smells change as well. So if you're going from a city into a shadow road, you can use this opportunity to change the smells from cooking foods wafting through the air to the smell of rotting undergrowth or other types of smells. Regardless of how you create your shadow road on what it looks like and how it plays, the one thing that is consistent is it's not very wide. And I've seen described in other Kobold Press publications, I can't remember off the top of my head, that you can see in the distance the shadow realm themselves, and as you're walking, you see the pace of time slowed. So you can really play that up to where the body starts to tingle. You start to feel pain or compression on your chest, or your breathing is labored as you're adapting to the shadow road from whence you came. For Courts of the Shadow Fey, I sketched out what a shadow road looked like, and I had a nice read-in to what the PCs are experiencing.
I kind of picture like you were saying, like kind of Grim Hollow, like Sleepy Hollow, like the Headless Horseman. You see that dirt road with the dead trees kind of curving up and around kind of deal. But it's the shadow roads are both in the shadow realm but separate from it at the same time, because time passes differently within the shadow road. But veering off the road can lead you into the shadow realm. So I almost kind of picture this like distorted atmosphere around it that blurs everything outside the shadow road. You could pass through it, but when you're in it, time passes differently. Things are different within it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, time is slowed outside of the shadow raid.
Think of it like the current in Finding Nemo that the turtles are riding.
Exactly. Oh man, dude.
But you can pass outside of it, and then you're in the rest of the ocean. But while you're in it, man, you're moving fast.
Yeah, for sure. And it could be, the Shadow Road could be like Willy Wonka's factory. It could be this fun, jovial place with interesting creatures and off-ramps to where you can, visit a bazaar or a particular restaurant. There's going to be folks that are going to want to make money. So, of course, they're going to create businesses, along the Shadow Roads as well.
Did we just make Oompa Loompas Midgard canon?
Absolutely. It's there.
Okay.
Let it be written.
They're there.
Let it be done.
They're a thing in Midgard now, people.
Yeah. Yeah. So, again, doesn't have to be dark and creepy. It could be fun and jovial, whimsical, what have you. So let's talk about the Overland Way.
Yes, let's talk about the Overland Way. So we covered Shadow Roads, which I love, but let's talk about the Tomierran Forest. In the eastern half of Dornig lies this Tomierran Forest. It's a different sort of forest entirely. The Abernese is still populated by the descendants of the elves, but Tomierran has been abandoned completely. The call for the Great Retreat came from the Tower of Thorn. And within the day, it said there were no longer any elves within the forest boundaries. It's a place of ancient trees, weathered ruins. Great magic of the elves runs deep in these places. And there are towns where time has stopped entirely. The food on the tables is still warm from when the elves rose from the tables at the sounding of the horn, never to return again. It's a land of magical monsters and animated plants. The remains of elven arcane experiments, dryads, and moss lurkers are commonly sighted here, along with free-willed elementals and magical creations such as owlbears and peritons. All sorts of stuff here, right? These are the guardians of the secrets of the elves. The forest kind of gives me a bit of the vibe from The Hobbit when the dwarves go into that one forest and they veer off the path and they kind of lose themselves there. Yeah. It kind of gives me that forest vibes. Ancient and old and magical, all that kind of stuff. The forest was, for centuries, the Imperatrix's personal estate. with trespassers and fortune hunters found within its borders subject to the full extent of the law. It's like the King's Wood, right? The forest is now an official holding of the Church of Ural and Porvit, but the rules against looters remain in force. Those who are caught must hand over their recovered treasures and share whatever knowledge they might have gained. Official explorations were once sponsored by the Lords Arcane and heavily influenced by the Eldos Donner clan of Raywald. But these have officially stopped by the order of the Saint Mistress. Church-sanctioned explorations are still launched out of Thorngard, with shadier, more independent attempts to depart from the Imperial Conservatory of Tomorrow. So I mentioned a few different places up in there, and we may touch on some of those in more detail later on. But you can find information on all these different places like Raywald and things like that in the Midgard World Book. The stone galleries actually sit at the eastern edge of the Tomierran Forest, near the Krovakian border. This was a thriving elven city centuries ago, and its ruins are now a breeding ground for like basilisk and cockatrice, all sorts of nasty stuff in there. Beneath the roofless shells of the ancient buildings and towers actually lies a network of underground passages controlled by a Medusa sorcerers. So that should be fun. These tunnels connect to the underworld and the Ghoul Emporium. And if the party travels overland, they arrive at the ruins after about 16 days or so of travel. There is a map in Empire of Ghouls for a portion of the ruins, along with an encounter in a pretty good roll table called Random Encounters in Krakovar, which is on page 92. So anything else about this area is going to be kind of a huge spoiler. So we're going to stop here today. I think this is a good stopping point, and we can move into our Creature Showcase segment, pick up some more on Empire of the Ghouls in our next episode. So, Clay, with that, tell us what you have this week for our Creature Showcase.
Yeah, my creature for this episode is found on page 92 in Empire of the Ghouls in the Random Encounters in Krakovar that Joe mentioned earlier. It is a half-bone, half-purple fire Lich Hound that releases an eerie howl that echoes with the voices of the damned. When you look at them, bright white skulls with a heavy jaw and thick, robust skeletal bodies define the ferocious Lich Hounds. Their eyes burn green or blue, and their tongues resemble black fire. These creatures are fueled by necromantic power, and they are loyal servants of undead high priests or liches. So this creature could be used by GMs to foreshadow the appearance of a ghoul high priestess of the hunger cult pursuing the party. But even on their own, Lich Hounds are relentless hunters, pursuing their prey with a powerful sense and a keen ability to find living wherever the creatures may hide. Lich Hound's howls fade into and out of normal hearing with strangely shifted pitch and echoes. The dark process of creating a Lich Hound involves a perverse ritual of first summoning a celestial canine and binding it to the material plane. The Hound's future master then murders the trapped beast. Only then can the creature be animated in all its unholy glory. Hound-like celestials have long been outraged by the creation of Lich Hounds, and every few centuries they band together to rid the world of those practicing this particular dark magic. Inevitably, some knowledge survives this purge, leaving Lich Hounds a constant, painful reality for celestials. So this is a CR4 creature with an armor class of 14. It has 85 average hit points, max would be 120, and it has a flying speed of 50 feet. A Lich Hound can pinpoint the location of creatures that aren't constructs of undead within 60 feet of it, and can sense the general direction of such creatures within a mile of it. As part of its action, the Lich Hound releases an eerie howl that fades in and out and echoes strangely. Each creature within 30 feet of the Lich Hound must succeed on a DC 14 Wisdom saving throw or be frightened for 1 minute. This is the action I'd lead off with before its 2 bite attacks. If it succeeds, you nerf your target immediately. They just stand there while the Lich Hound continues with its bite attacks. Now, if both bite attacks hit, the target must then make another Constitution saving throw, a DC 14. And on failure, they take an additional 2d6 slashing damage and will be incapacitated until the end of its next turn. So in just one action, this critter can take a player out of melee. But the cool thing is their bonus action. It can bamf to the ethereal plane and remove itself from combat until its next turn. To return to the fight, it would again need to use its bonus action to return to the material plane, except you can put them in a different location. So you can use this ethereal jaunt bonus action to disappear and move unseen in the ethereal plane, more or less invisible and undetectable from the party which is residing in the material plane. And then you wait for that perfect moment for them to re-enter combat or use it to escape. Now, this is a huge tactical benefit to this Lich Hound, particularly since it's a CR4 creature. Creatures that aren't on the ethereal plane can't perceive you and can't interact with you. So unless your PC has a special ability or magic that allows them to see into the ethereal plane, this is a great boon to this creature. And I also will use this bonus action as a way to do reconnaissance on the party before they attack. So the bottom line is these creatures can be used to tie up your PCs until a high CR creature such as a Ghoul High Priestess shows up. And this is such an awesome creature. So I've given you an encounter. They could be like a group of like 3 dogs accompanying a Ghoul High Priestess. You can bring the High Priestess in later on, tie them up with the Lich Hounds initially for a few rounds, and then drop that Ghoul High Priestess in. That will really bolster the encounter and the fear and stir your characters up. So love this creature. Love its ability to bamf in and out of combat. Love its ties to how they're created by slaying a celestial hound. Super cool. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, I was thinking like I like them as like undead hunting dogs, right? Like think like Ramsay from Game of Thrones, but like undead. With the hounds chasing the party down and hunting them down, you constantly hear the howls and the barks and whatnot. And then when they finally catch up and they attack the party, and you do a couple of rounds with the dogs before the priestess comes out, like just that whole make it a chase, right? I do a total chasing the party, and the party just on the run from these things.
Yeah, and like, those sounds can come in all kinds of directions as well.
All directions. I mean, 3 of them, 5 of them, whatever. Throw a bunch of them out there, and depending on your party's level and how many players you have, I would say like do about a 1 hound for every 1.5 to 2 players, right? Yeah. Like if you have a party of 5, throw 3. If you have a party of 6, maybe stick at 3, maybe 4. Like 1 extra kind of deal. I would build up the tension and the fear of these things before they finally attack.
Yeah. Now be careful with these creatures. They can be a little triggering to those that are afraid of dogs. So, in your session 0, make sure you understand what could potentially trigger your players. So just a word of warning. So, Joe, what do you have?
Well, we talked about Shadow Roads, so I wanted to focus on that a bit. One of the things that happens on the Shadow Roads is they're often patrolled or guarded by certain types of, like, for lack of a better term, we'll call them bandits. Different things can attack you on the Shadow Road and make your journey there difficult. They are not safe places. You're not just walking down a road and it's like, oh, hey, I just knocked 2 weeks off of travel off and we're here. It's a dangerous journey. One such creature that you can encounter on this stood out to me when I was looking through Creature Codex. It is called the Shadow Fey Knight of the Road. So these are interesting beings. These are going to be an elf, a shadow elf, but they essentially are highwaymen, highwaywomen that will use different things such as robbery, ransom, murder as an opportunity to enrich themselves. They're basically looking to get rich. They're independent contractors. They may work for somebody. They may just work for themselves. But they have some special abilities in and around Shadow Roads that make them well suited for this type of work. These elves are generally, or at least often, kind of these out of favor minor nobilities from the Shadow Realm, and they study every kind of nook and cranny of the territory in which they work. They have a very good understanding of their Shadow Road. They use their accumulated knowledge against their quarry with great effort in the hopes of using new wealth and knowledge and infamy to curry favor with their betters. So they're generally trying to obtain wealth and knowledge in order to kind of get back in favor in whatever court they may be part of or formerly part of. But Knights of the Road, they generally prefer to fight, hunt, and threaten and do their business in the Shadow Realm, though they are active anywhere that connects to it. So this is a CR5 creature. They have an average of 117 HP, but a max of like 180. They're well armored with 16 AC. And stat wise, I mean, their lowest ability score is wisdom at 12. They're fast, they're strong, they're tough, they're intelligent. So they are a fairly dangerous adversary. And I would even maybe venture to throw two of these at the party at the same time, because a single target versus a party of 4 or 5, even with that kind of HP, might go down a little quick. But they have one main ability that I really think makes them great, and it's called Obscure the Way. So if they are outside of a Shadow Gate, they can actually make it so you cannot activate the Shadow Gate. Your spells won't work. You would need something like a special magical key of Velis, which they talk about in the Midgard World Book. But aside from that, they can make it so that you cannot actually enter the Shadow Road at all. Or if they're working within the Shadow Realm, they can use this ability so that it will not bring you to your normal destination. You'll basically kind of get stuck in this meandering loop that can last anywhere between 2 and 16 days. It's 2d8 days, or until it removes the effect, right? Or unless they die. So they can kind of get you just stuck in the shadow, on the Shadow Road for as long as they want. They'll actually use that opportunity to study you, look for weaknesses, things like that, so that when they attack you, they have a better shot. They're Shadow Elves, so they're going to have keen sight. They're going to have the Fey ancestry, those kind of abilities. But they are also sunlight sensitive. So that's why they generally prefer to work within the Shadow Realm, because if they're outside the gates and it's sunny, that will be their disadvantage. But they do have an ability called Travel in Darkness. So they have advantage on any kind of intelligence checks made to know anything about Shadow Roads and shadow magic spells or items, things like that. So if somehow you can persuade them to help you, they may be able to provide some knowledge as well. But when it comes to combat, they're fairly straightforward. And this is something where I feel like maybe you might want to take some liberties and improve on, because they basically they have a long sword, a lance, or a short bow, and they have multi-attack with their long sword or a short bow. So it's fairly straightforward combat. They do poison their short bow, so there is a Constitution save where you're poisoned for a minute. But they do have an ability called Shadow Traveler, which is they can use 3 a day. It's essentially a Misty Step type of thing, where they can disappear and reappear in another spot within 30 feet as a bonus action, as long as they're in shadow. And like when they vanish, there's like this inky smoke that appears at the origin and the destination when they use it. So, but they just kind of pop out into shadow and pop in somewhere else. So they can pop around the battlefield a little bit as a bonus action. That won't draw opportunity attacks or anything like that. It can be a very cool encounter on the Shadow Road. Maybe throw another one at them. Maybe they're leading a group of bear folk or something else as well. Maybe they have a few underlings. You can just throw some elf bandits or something like that if you want to throw a few minor, smaller creatures in there with them. But they're a fairly dangerous foe on the Shadow Road. So, Clay, I know you've been on Shadow Roads with your party. Did you ever use one of these, or have any types of encounters like these with some kind of bandits on the Shadow Road?
No, I usually took it easy and threw creatures at them. But had I known about this, or had I studied enough to learn about this creature. I'm riffing off of Robin Hood and his merry men, with these
Exactly,
guys,
but bad Robin Hood.
Yeah, yeah, and you could have bear folk and shadow elves and
The
goblins
bear
and
folk is Little John.
yeah, 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 yeah,
We get a tiefling to be the minstrel guy. What was his name? I can't remember. Yeah.
yeah,
Just make an evil version of Robin Hood and his merry men out of this.
yeah, or just chaotic neutral.
Yeah.
They're there to just earn a living, so to speak. I wish I knew about this character because Creature Codex came out, memory serves, about the same time as Empire of the Ghouls. It's a great trope. I love that you talked about this because you don't have to throw scary creatures at your party when you're on the Shadow Road. And I think this is a great hook into doing something where it starts out with conversation, then a little combat, and then some more conversation, then some more combat. And, maybe at the end of it, everybody's sitting around a fire at night telling lies about their adventures and stuff like that. They could end up acting as your guides if you do something for them.
Yeah, I mean, this one, it's funny because, I did the Creature Codex Foundry conversion for Kobold Press, and this creature is just one of the ones that stood out to me, that I really remembered. I was like, I have to use this creature at some point. I don't know what it was. It just stood out. It's cool art in the book too, but just the whole concept behind it of being this like Shadow Road guardian, or not even, I don't call it a guardian, but a Shadow Road bandit kind of deal. It just spoke to me, and I like the idea when you said Robin Hood. And now I'm like thinking like, oh yeah, there's going to be a bear folk named Little Bear and a tiefling that's like the minstrel. Like, I'm gonna totally do Robin Hood and his merry men with all shadow creatures.
Yeah, yeah. And what I love about both of the creatures we presented is their bonus actions. This ability to kind of bamf out of the way. It drives PCs nuts. I know when I play against creatures like this and suddenly they disappear from in front of me, it's like, oh, damn it. What do I do now? And one thing I didn't talk up much about with the Lich Hound is it has that ability to fly. So they can just like fly out of the way and get out of your melee or even your spellcasting range, So
yeah, I mean, you get two melees on this guy, right? He can bamf out, that's 30 feet. And then he can move another 30 feet. Now he's 60 feet out and then shoot you with his arrow and poison you.
Yeah.
And then like now he's 60 feet out. You're not going to be able to catch up with him without some magic or something, or unless you have a rogue in the party. And now he can just sit there and shoot an arrow, move 30 feet, shoot an arrow, move 30 feet, stay out of your range.
Yeah, and these are creatures that you can kind of script out a little bit. Their first action, they're going to do this. Their second action, they're going to do this. Because you generally know what your party's going to do. Based on how they've played previous encounters. So it could be like a little easy checklist. It's like that big book, Monsters and How to Fight Them. I don't think that's the exact title.
The monsters know what they're doing.
Yeah, these are great creatures to kind of just sketch out a little outline of your combat with them, and that way you can kind of really. Instead of just like shooting from the hip, you have a plan for how you're gonna
very
use
stick
this.
and move.
Yeah.
I'd be shooting arrows, bamfing, shooting arrow, 2 arrows, bamfing. Never let the party get within melee range, like really, bamf up into a tree up atop so they can't get up to you. I mean, all sorts of stuff that you can do that would just frustrate the party.
Draw out the combat. Again, these aren't super high CR creatures, but they're high enough to really give your party a tough.
Yeah. No, I mean, 180 hit points is nothing to sneeze at. Like, you max out their hit points, 118 hit points, 16 AC. Yeah, man, that's going to be a tough fight.
Yeah.
Big saving throws, too. I mean, +7 on dex save, +5 on con save, +4 on wisdom save, and +6 on charisma save. They're proficient in 4 saving throws.
Yeah. That's awesome. So, what a great choice. All right, that's our show. I hope you enjoyed it. In our next show, we're going to get into the city of Jost in the Wolfmark. We're going to talk a lot about Reaver Dwarves and the Temple of Sif, including the goddess Sif herself. So tune in for our next episode. Also, thank you so much. This is an extra long episode. So thanks a lot for sticking with us on this, because there's just a lot of great information that we wanted to get out to you to help you prep for your Empire of the Ghouls games. So, Joe, how can people reach you?
Well, you can find me on YouTube at GM Toolbox, as well as on TikTok and Facebook and Instagram, all at GM Toolbox. I'm also on Twitter at GM_Toolbox. And of course, you can always find me on the Midgard Adventures Discord at GM Toolbox there. How about you, Clay?
Yeah, same here. You can reach me on the Midgard Adventures Discord server at Clayton Thompson, and that's Thompson without a P. So the Midgard Adventures Discord server is an independent fan-based cooperative group that is affiliated with Kobold Press. There we talk lore, share tips and tricks, answer questions, and offer organized play games both online and IRL. Our community is open to everyone, particularly those new to Midgard and role-playing games in general. We also have a dedicated channel for That Midgard Show on the server where you can post a comment or talk about the content of the show. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can also do the very same thing in the comments below. We do read them. We will read comments from time to time or incorporate them into our show. In fact, one of our listeners gave us the idea for traveling through the lore and locations of Empire of the Ghouls. So keep them coming.
Yep, absolutely. So make sure you come by, chat with us. We're there. A bunch of the kobolds hang out there and some of the writers. So a lot of times you'll ask a question, you'll get a response right from one of the person who wrote the book. So it is a very, very cool place.
Yeah.
So check us out. There's the invitation link available in the show notes below. And if you like our show, please click on the like button and subscribe to our channel. And make sure you spread the word about That Midgard Show. We're also on all major podcast platforms, so please subscribe, leave us a positive comment, and maybe give us a 5-star review. So that is it for today, everybody. Thank you again for joining us. We know it was a longer episode, but man, we like doing it. And remember, as Wolfgang Barr says,
strip it for parts and make it your own. Thank you for joining us. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.